Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you like what you hear, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you don't miss any future deep dives. Especially if you want to keep up with your modern Indian history lessons. Right. That's a little wink to all those UPSC aspirants gearing up for the GS1 exam. Today we're diving into a pivotal chapter in India's fight for freedom, the non-cooperation movement. We'll be using excerpts from a text titled Pasted Text for this deep dive.
Sounds fascinating. I'm ready to jump in.
It really is. This is the first nationwide movement led by Gandhi, a real turning point that shaped India's journey to independence. So let's set the stage. Picture India in the early 1920s. World War I had just ended. But instead of the greater autonomy they were promised for their support, Indians were met with, you guessed it, continued oppression. Economic hardships were hitting everyone hard, and a wave of discontent was sweeping the nation. It was a powder keg, just waiting to explode.
A powder keg, I like that analogy.
And the fuse, that was the non-cooperation movement. So what were the key factors that fueled this movement? What pushed the Indian people to this breaking point?
Well, you're absolutely right to point out that feeling of betrayal after World War I, Indians had stood by the British, contributed to the war effort, and hoped for greater independence in return.
Right. They held up their end of the bargain.
Exactly. And instead, they got the short end of the stick, the British went back on their word, and this ignited a deep sense of resentment and frustration. Imagine feeling like you'd done your part, only to be cheated out of what you were promised. It's no wonder people were angry.
It really is. And it's almost as if the British didn't learn their lesson, because then they doubled down with policies like the Revolt Act in 1919. That was like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire.
Isn't it? Precisely. The Revolt Act allowed the British to imprison people without trial, effectively suspending basic civil liberties.
Taking away their basic rights.
It was a blatant attempt to suppress any dissent, and it backfired spectacularly. And then, of course, there's the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre, a moment that truly encapsulates the brutality of the colonial regime.
A truly dark moment in history.
A peaceful gathering of unarmed civilians, men, women, and children fired upon by British troops, hundreds were killed. This event seared itself into the collective memory of the nation, becoming a symbol of British oppression and a rallying cry for the fight for freedom.
It's a moment that should never be forgotten. And it's impossible to ignore the role of economic hardship in all of this. I mean, how can people focus on fighting for political freedom when they're struggling to put food on the table?
You've hit the nail on the head. The economic exploitation of India by the British was a constant source of resentment. Imagine dealing with crippling inflation, heavy taxes imposed by a foreign power.
Not to mention being forced to cultivate cash crops.
Yeah, that benefited the British, while neglecting the needs of their own people. This economic reality was the backdrop against which the non-cooperation movement unfolded. It was a struggle for political freedom intertwined with a fight for basic economic survival.
So you have all these simmering tensions, this feeling of betrayal, and this constant economic pressure. Enter Gandhi, who had already proven himself as a leader in smaller localized movements like Champaran and Kedah. He had this ability to mobilize people, to inspire them to action. What was it about the non-cooperation movement that allowed him to step onto the national stage?
Well, Gandhi had built a reputation as a leader who could deliver, someone who could stand up to the British. His earlier successes in movements like Champaran and Kedah focused on specific local issues, gave him credibility and a loyal following.
You had a track record of success.
Exactly. But what really propelled the non-cooperation movement to a national level was the convergence with another important movement of the time, the Khilafat movement.
The Khilafat movement? Wasn't that led by Muslims protesting the dismantling of the Ottoman Caliphate after World War I?
Exactly. And Gandhi brilliantly recognized the potential in uniting Hindus and Muslims in a shared struggle against British rule. This alliance, this coming together of two major religious communities, infused the non-cooperation movement with incredible strength and breadth. For those of you prepping for the UPSC exams, pay close attention to this dynamic of Hindu-Muslim unity.
It's a key theme in modern Indian history.
Absolutely. It's a recurring theme in India's struggle for independence and a testament to the power of collective action across religious lines.
So Gandhi calls for non-cooperation.
Yeah.
But what did that actually look like in practice? It's one thing to say, we're not cooperating.
Yeah.
But how do you translate that into a tangible movement with real impact?
Well, the movement unfolded in carefully planned stages, each designed to escalate the pressure on the British. The first phase was symbolic. Indians were urged to surrender titles and honorary positions that had been bestowed upon them by the British.
A way of rejecting their authority.
Yes, it was a way of saying, we no longer recognize your authority.
Then came the boycott right. That was a pretty powerful tool, hitting the British where it hurt their wallets and their institutions.
The boycott was absolutely central to the movement. It was a way for ordinary Indians to exert their power, to disrupt the colonial system. They boycotted foreign goods, British courts, government schools, and even elections held under British law. This is where the concept of Swadeshi, using Indian-made goods, really took hold.
Embracing their own products.
It was a way of rejecting British economic dominance and fostering a sense of self-reliance.
I remember reading about people publicly burning piles of foreign-made clothes. It was a dramatic and powerful statement, wasn't it? And then, of course, you have Khadi, the hand-spun cloth, and the charkha, the spinning wheel, becoming these potent symbols of resistance.
Absolutely. Embracing Khadi wasn't just about economics, it was about reclaiming Indian identity, about taking pride in their own traditions and craftsmanship. It was a way of saying, we can provide for ourselves, we don't need your goods.
So the movement starts gaining traction. People are inspired. They're taking action. How did this play out in different parts of India? Did it look the same everywhere?
That's what makes this movement so fascinating. The response was incredibly diverse, reflecting the unique social, economic, and political conditions of each region. It wasn't a monolithic movement, it was a tapestry woven from different threads of resistance.
Let's take a look at some of those threads. What were some of the most striking examples of how the non-cooperation movement played out in different parts of the country?
Let's start with Bengal,
Okay.
where you had widespread agitations against the union board system, which was seen as a tool of British control over local administration. In Assam, plantation workers and railway staff went on strike, paralyzing key industries. The United Provinces witnessed a surge in peasant uprisings, with organizations like Kisan Sabhas, which were essentially peasant unions, gaining prominence and challenging the authority of landlords.
And then you have the Akali movement for Gurudwara reform in Punjab. That's particularly interesting because it showcases the remarkable communal unity that emerged in certain pockets during the non-cooperation movement.
Exactly. The Akalis, a Sikh reform movement, were fighting for control of their religious institutions, or gurudwaras, which were under British influence. They found common cause with the broader non-cooperation movement, demonstrating the power of shared goals in bridging religious divides.
And in Rajasthan, the focus was on challenging the exploitative taxes and forced labor imposed by the British and local rulers.
Right. Rajasthan was a hotbed of anti-colonial sentiment, and the non-cooperation movement provided a platform for people to voice their grievances and resist oppression.
And down south in Gujarat Vallabhbhai, Patel played a pivotal role in spreading the movement right.
Patel was instrumental in mobilizing the masses in Gujarat. He was a pragmatic leader who saw non-cooperation as a preferable alternative to revolutionary terrorism, a path some were advocating for at the time. He understood the power of mass mobilization, but also emphasized the importance of discipline and nonviolence.
I guess not every region saw the same level of enthusiastic participation, though. Were there areas where the response was more muted?
Yes, in some regions the response was less pronounced, for instance in Karnataka, while there were worker strikes in textile mills. The overall participation in the movement was relatively subdued compared to other areas, but even in those regions where the response wasn't as overwhelming, the ideas of the non-cooperation movement were seeping into the consciousness of the people, planting seeds for future resistance.
It seems like Andhra Pradesh had some particularly captivating stories emerge from the movement. We have the story of Alluri Sitaram Raju leading a tribal rebellion against British forest laws, and the incredible Kerala Perla tax revolt, where an entire town refused to pay taxes. Those are such vivid examples of the diverse ways in which resistance manifested during this period.
Absolutely. These stories highlight the courage and resilience of ordinary Indians who are willing to stand up for their rights. Alluri Sitaram Raju, in particular, became a folk hero, a symbol of tribal resistance against British exploitation. The Kerala Perla tax revolt showed the power of collective action, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.
And we can't forget about the contributions of leaders like C. Rajagopalachari and Periyar EVR in Tamil Nadu, who played a crucial role in mobilizing people and shaping the course of the movement in the South.
Their leadership was crucial in spreading the message of non-cooperation and galvanizing support for the movement. And in Kerala, you had a complex interplay of peasant struggles and the Mopilla Revolt, which unfortunately took a violent turn. The Mopilla Rebellion, while initially aligned with the non-cooperation movement, highlighted the challenges of maintaining nonviolent resistance in the face of deep-seated grievances and oppressive conditions.
So you have this nationwide movement gaining momentum. People from all walks of life are rising up. There's this sense of unity and purpose. And then seemingly out of nowhere, Gandhi makes the decision to call it off in 1922. It's a decision that has been debated by historians ever since. What led him to make this unexpected move?
This is where the story takes a dramatic turn, and it's crucial to understand the factors that led to Gandhi's decision. The Chari Chara incident in 1922 was a turning point. A clash between protesters and police in the town of Chari Chara resulted in the death of several police officers. This act of violence deeply troubled Gandhi, who was a staunch believer in ahimsa or nonviolence. He felt the movement was veering off course, straying from its core principles.
So the violence at Chari Chara was a major factor in his decision. Were there other concerns weighing on him?
Yes, Gandhi was also deeply concerned about the rise of militancy within the movement. He was committed to nonviolent resistance, and any deviation from that path was unacceptable to him. He saw the potential for the movement to descend into chaos and violence, which he believed would ultimately undermine the cause of Indian independence.
And let's not forget that the Khilafat movement, which had provided such a powerful boost to the non-cooperation movement, was also facing challenges.
Right. The political situation in Turkey was changing, and the Khilafat movement began to lose momentum, which inevitably had repercussions for the non-cooperation movement in India.
So Gandhi, faced with the violence at Chari Chara, concerns about rising militancy, the waning of the Khilafat movement, and a deep personal commitment to nonviolence, made the incredibly difficult decision to call off the movement. It must have been a heartbreaking decision for him and for all those who had poured their hopes and energy into the struggle.
It was a turning point for sure. But even though the movement didn't achieve its immediate goal of Swaraj or self-rule, it's crucial to understand that it had a profound and lasting impact on India's journey towards independence.
That's a really important point. The movement might have been called off, but its legacy lived on. We'll delve into that legacy, exploring its impact on the future of the Indian independence movement and what it means for us today, right after a quick message. Don't go anywhere.
It's easy to look back and think, oh, they called it off, it was a failure. But let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
All right, so the non-cooperation movement didn't lead to immediate independence for India. But what were its lasting impacts? What makes it such a significant chapter in the larger story of India's struggle for freedom?
One of the most remarkable things to come out of the non-cooperation movement was the way it brought Hindus and Muslims together in a shared struggle against British rule. This level of unity, it was unprecedented at the time. It sent a powerful message to the British that Indians, regardless of their religious beliefs, were united in their desire for freedom.
And for those of you preparing for the UPSC exams, especially the GS1 paper on modern Indian history, this aspect of Hindu-Muslim unity is something to really pay attention to. It played a crucial role in shaping India's future and continues to be a relevant topic even today.
Absolutely. The non-cooperation movement also forced India to confront the deeply ingrained issue of social justice, including the horrific practice of untouchability. For the first time, these issues were thrust into the national spotlight, becoming central to the conversation about India's future.
Gandhi's commitment to social justice was unwavering, wasn't it? He saw the fight for independence as inseparable from the fight for a more just and equitable society.
Precisely. And perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of the non-cooperation movement was the way it empowered ordinary Indians, men and women from all walks of life, to participate in the freedom struggle. It was no longer a movement confined to the elite or the intellectuals.
It was a movement of the people.
It was about the farmer in his field, the worker in the factory, the student in the classroom, all coming together to demand their rights and shape their own destiny.
It's amazing to think about how women in particular were drawn into the movement. This was a time when women were largely confined to the domestic sphere, yet they stepped out of their homes, boycotted foreign goods, spun khadi, and even faced imprisonment for their beliefs.
The non-cooperation movement was a catalyst for women's participation in the public sphere. It provided them with a platform to challenge not just colonial rule, but also traditional gender roles.
It really ignited a sense of national consciousness that had never been seen before, didn't it? It was a collective awakening, a realization that the power to change their fate lay in their own hands.
Exactly. It shattered the myth of British invincibility, showing them that their days of unchallenged rule were numbered. And it laid the groundwork for future movements like the civil disobedience movement and the Quit India movement, which ultimately led to India's independence.
So it wasn't just about achieving immediate victory. It was about planting seeds for long-term change. Seeds that would eventually blossom into a free and independent India.
Think of it as a domino effect. The non-cooperation movement might not have toppled the British Empire outright, but it set off a chain of events that made independence inevitable. It shifted the balance of power, emboldened the Indian people, and exposed the vulnerabilities of the colonial regime.
It's fascinating how a movement that was ultimately called off could have such a profound ripple effect. Now, before we wrap up, I want to go back to that pivotal moment when Gandhi decided to call off the movement. We talked about the factors that influenced his decision, but was it ultimately a setback, a strategic retreat, or something else entirely?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And one that historians continue to debate to this day. There's no easy answer. Some argue that calling off the movement at its peak was a missed opportunity, a moment where the British could have been pushed further. Others believe it was a necessary step to preserve the movement's core values and prevent it from descending into chaos and violence, which could have backfired and set back the cause of independence.
It's such a complex situation. On the one hand, you have this incredible momentum, this energy, this potential to really challenge British authority. But on the other hand, you have Gandhi's unwavering commitment to nonviolence and his concern about the movement spiraling out of control.
And his fear that if the movement became too radical, it would lose the support of the masses and alienate potential allies.
It's a reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy. It's messy, it's full of contradictions, and there are often no easy answers. And ultimately, that's what makes studying history so compelling, isn't it? It challenges us to wrestle with these nuanced questions to try and understand the motivations and choices of those who came before us.
Absolutely. It's about engaging in critical thinking, considering different perspectives, and recognizing that even movements with limitations and setbacks can have a profound and lasting impact on the course of history.
And that's a powerful lesson for us all, isn't it? Whether we're facing down an empire or just grappling with everyday challenges, the non-cooperation movement reminds us that collective action guided by principles can be a powerful force for change. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the roots of the non-cooperation movement, the strategies they used, and the impact it had on different regions of India. It's a story with a lot of layers, but ultimately it's a story of hope.
It really is. It shows us that even movements that don't achieve their immediate goals can have a ripple effect that shapes the future.
Before we wrap up this deep dive into the non-cooperation movement, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Ooh, a cliffhanger to end on.
And
Like it.
exactly. Imagine if the non-cooperation movement had continued, had not been called off in 1922. How might things have unfolded differently? Would it have led to an earlier independence for India? Or would it have gone down a different, more violent path?
These are hypothetical questions, of course, but they invite us to think deeply about history, about the choices leaders make, and the unexpected consequences that can follow.
It reminds us that history is not a straight line. It's full of twists and turns, unexpected events, and unforeseen outcomes. And it's up to us to grapple with those complexities, to learn from the past, and to apply those lessons to the challenges we face today.
The non-cooperation movement might be a chapter in India's history, but its themes of resistance, unity, and the pursuit of justice are still relevant today.
If you're preparing for the UPSC exams, I encourage you to dig deeper into this period. Explore the primary sources and really understand the nuances of the movement and its impact. And for everyone else, whether you're a history buff or just curious about India's past, I hope this deep dive has given you a glimpse into this pivotal moment in India's struggle for freedom.
And remember, history is not just about memorizing dates and events. It's about understanding the forces that shape our world, the choices people make, and the impact those choices have.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. If you enjoyed this exploration of the non-cooperation movement, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives. We've got some more fascinating topics lined up, so stay tuned.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.